Church ministers, missionaries and Christian leaders from across the world were planning a quiet doze. Jet-lagged and tired after a lengthy discussion, a session entitled Christianity and the Odds sounded like a good moment to relax in the lecture theatre. Lights dimmed, and a spotlight dramatically illuminated a lectern in the centre of the platform. But a bizarre figure walked up the aisle and recited a poem.
Are you there, God? Hello? Are you there? Is anybody there?
First time I went to church was on a Sunday morning. From what I'd heard, I'd likely find I spend the whole time yawning. We're going to be making a film of a dream that I had when I was here in 1964 to 67. This is All Nations Christian College. A dream which radically changed my life and set going a movement around the world of Christian commitment to Christ and to their calling as artists, a place where it's safe to ask your questions.
Nigel?
Yes, John.
We're both on now.
Yeah. Okay.
That's my credit.
I'd be given a book called Through Gates of Splendor, written by Elizabeth Elliot. And she had written about her husband and 4 other missionaries from Wheaton College, where she was based and he had been based, studying, and who had taken the scriptures, the gospel, to Ecuador in 1957 to the Huarani, the Auca Indians. I felt certain that this is where I was meant to go, and I needed to get training to know what was it I was going to bring other than myself.
So you came to All Nations for that training?
I did indeed.
And what happened?
Well, I'm here and I'm learning comparative religions, other religions. I'm learning Old Testament, I'm learning New Testament, I'm learning many things. I'm sharing voice production with other students because that's what I knew, how to produce your voice in Africa, Asia, Latin America without a microphone, intercostal diaphragmatic breathing and all that stuff. So I'm teaching it to the students and they're teaching me bricklaying and some dentistry. Some of them were dentists and they had different trades, and we were sharing our trades one with another. And I went to bed one night still absolutely certain that South America was my calling. In that night, I had an overwhelming dream of a picture of a house in a city full of artists in the fine and the performing arts. They were talking art one with another, but they were talking about being Christian and being artists. What does that mean? What did it mean for them? They were crying, they were understanding, misunderstanding each other. Some were hurting, some felt really confident, some less confident. But they were all working in theatre, poets, musicians, singers, dancers, filmmakers, radio broadcasters, behind the camera, in front of the camera. They were all quite certain, or reasonably certain, about their gifting and their calling as artists. And it must have been a very big room. I don't know how big it was. They just seemed to be full of people. Some of them were eating. Some of them were drinking. Some of them were talking over with food in their hand. I woke up in the morning overwhelmed by this. And I remember first thing I said when my eyes were open, Lord, what is that all about? David Winter, who was editor of a magazine called Crusade then, was a friend. I'd worked with Crusade in the months leading up to my coming to college. And David said to me, I know some other people who go to my church who are not thinking that too different to yourself. In the same way, why don't you come and share this dream with them? These people were Ron Allison, who became private secretary to the late Queen, our late Queen. John Webb, who was an architect at the time. Merrill Fergus, who was my fiancée and was at Mount Hermon Missionary Training College at the time, but was interested in writing and publishing and had worked at Crusade magazine. Cindy Kent, who was in the Settlers, a very popular folk group of that day, the Settlers, and Cliff Richard. So the connections were fascinating, but I shared this dream with them.
If you were a keen Christian in those days, you had to be going to be a missionary, or you had to be going to be a vicar, you know. You didn't have to going to be a broadcaster or a film director or an actor. And these were the things that actually influenced people. Nigel Goodwin was desperate that Christians should be involved, you know, in the wider culture. And he was nagging away, he nagged at me that we really needed something, and he was quite right. He could see the way it was going, and if we didn't do something to encourage Christians to work in this area, there won't be any.
And one of them, I don't know whether it was David or Cliff maybe, or Cindy, said, why don't we pray together about this and see if it's got any legs, if it's going to go anywhere. And we didn't plan, nobody plans to pray for 100 years necessarily, but you pray in the moment of the situation in which you find yourself. And we prayed, and we subsequently prayed together for almost 7 years, meeting often in Chinese restaurants. Cliff liked Chinese food, and sometimes in a corner less quietly with one another. But Chinese food became part of our gathering, essential part of our gathering to pray together. Dear Cliff had recently been converted to Christ, and many people were saying to him, some of his friends, come out of rock and roll. You cannot be a Christian and be jigging about up there in rock and roll. Rock and roll is a dirty word, is a dirty place to be. You can't be Christian. And he was therefore naturally asking, is this true? Why can't I be? Why can't I be a Christian?
So Cliff Richard converting to Christianity in the 1960s was in the media in those days a very big story.
He was.
Because it was unusual for a pop star who was at the top of his trade to take this step of becoming a Christian so openly.
Yeah.
And your conversion to the Christian faith happened sort of not too long after that. So there's always been a connection between you and Cliff.
Yeah, I think he would say, wow, there's somebody else in the performing arts who thinks and feels and believes the same as I do. That's indeed a very deep and special relationship began between us.
The story of Nigel Goodwin is extraordinary.
Closing now, Nigel.
Yes, I'm good at that.
He was one of several isolated voices urging Christians to respect the arts as God-given resources in their own right, rather than as mere vehicles for evangelism.
The camera needs to be able to see the title of the book.
And I found I was not the only person who had been seeking for opportunities to integrate my work in the arts, media, and entertainment with my faith in Jesus Christ. After my conversion, I continued to work in the theatre, but I was more and more being drawn away from my agent or agents, plural, and more the desire to find work in the performing arts. So there has to be, in God's plan, a dying for there to be a rising. Meryl told me she didn't want to marry me in Hyde Park and took the ring off her finger. Very brave of her. And walked off out of the park. Today, and for many years, we are friends. There's wonderful healing, isn't there? But I felt rejected again. And I ran away to Switzerland. And on the side of Mont Blanc was a cafe, and in walked an interesting looking couple in their Lederhausen. And I went across the floor and I shook their hands and I said, "Hello, I'm Nigel," because that's what I do. And they said, "And we are Francis and Edith Schaefer. Would you like to come and join us?" As we shared conversation together. And over the next months, I made many visits, and the next years I made more visits. Schaefer was talking about objective empirical truth to an existential, unbelieving world. Cedar of Lebanon.
Yeah. Did you plant this when you were a student?
Possibly.
Do you remember it?
I do, John. Somewhere down memory lane, there is this amazing. We should all be huggers of trees. It's not just Judi Dench who hugs trees. We all can be huggers of trees. Trees are huge on the mind of our Creator. So I'm going to recite a poem by Michal Schiel, a wonderful poet now living in New York, but lived on the borders of North and South Ireland. And I met him at various places in Ireland and in America. I'm doing this poem Season here because this college is in a forest of God's creation, God's garden, God's trees. A season ago, these trees had flung a library full of ochre leaflets in a cross-winds free-for-all, as if determined to pose for months in the nude, to allow the low sun warm their leafless blood. And still it's winter, still this 21st century. What's the news to break? A bird's plaintive sound, still asking whether a world breathes underground. The hard-crusted soil turns in its sleep and cries, "Just live, man, I'm pushing up the daisies." Something young and dangerous stirs in the marrow bone of earth. Await the leap and resurrection of a season.
Nigel, it seems appropriate to do that poem in the middle of all this filming.
Absolutely appropriate, because it is the declaration of an artist, how they see the world. As C.S. Lewis said, nothing that has not first died will ever rise from the dead. And the seasons that we live through take us from death, nothing, helplessness, to life, meaning. Love is like a flower opening. It's like a plant growing. It's like a cedar It's like an acorn falling to ground and dying. And it's wonderful for an actor to marry a nurse. Gilly had a nursing background. She was full of care, love, compassion.
In those days, you coined the phrase togetherness.
Togetherness, I did indeed. And Gilly is much more left-brained than I am right-brained. But I do believe that left-brained people are creative people, and that right-brained people can be organized people. And the two can work together if they listen to each other. We moved into number 6, Hornton Place, Kensington.
And that was the first place where the Arts Centre group existed.
Yeah, it didn't have a name, I don't think. We had maybe talked together about name, I can't remember at the time. And it was us, but it was also the people who were coming. We became surrogate parents, Gilly and I, to many people. We had 60s cushions, bean bags in the L-shaped room. We gave it a name and we made a brochure, a simple brochure. We called it ACG, Arts Centre Group. A safe place to scratch, to go deeper. Blood on the wall, where you can ask the harder questions, the deeper questions, the questions that you can't find anywhere else to ask. The very first day we moved into Hornton Place with our goods and chattels, there was a guy called Ken Nunn, a filmmaker from Southern California, on the doorstep. And he said, "Hello, is this where artists gather?" We said, yes. He was our very first person to come in there. And very quickly, John, within a few months, the house was full of people, night and day.
Our first 5 years at Hornton Place were a mixture of sheer exhilaration and sheer exhaustion, intensive and encyclopedic. I was travelling a lot and helping to kickstart arts movements similar to our own in Sweden, Norway, France and Germany, and many other parts.
What does it mean to be fearfully and wonderfully made? They sound wonderful, but what's the paint behind that? What's the pencil behind that? What are the ingredients? What does it look like to be in the image of your maker? Groups were formed, a graphic arts group called Felt Lead Ink came together to talk about graphics, good graphics, not so good graphics. What is a good graphic? What does it look like? How is it formed? Architects came together, actors came together to talk about their craft. And there was nowhere else, it seemed, where you could go. And that's, I think, how it began to grow and spill out into other areas.
Those young artists who were attracted to Nigel and Gilly's pad grew up and got old.
They did, yes. The wallpaper, things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Doesn't last forever. They got old. God is there, and he is not silent, was Schaeffer's second book. Every generation has got to find the there and the not silent. They cannot borrow their parents' or their grandparents' ideas. Dying to an idea, our thoughts, our ideas, that is the hardest thing in the world. Coming back to All Nations College, thoughts go right back down memory lane to that time when I was here as a youngster in the faith. The amazing thing, John, is that this house used to belong to a family called the Berkeley Buxton family. particularly the Buxtons, Lady Hannah Buxton. And she has a plaque inside the house which says, "This house in the middle of the 19th century, I want it to be dedicated to those who come and find faith here, but also go from here with that faith into the uttermost parts of the world," not possibly knowing that 100 or more years later it would become a missionary training college doing that very thing that she dreamed about. All Nations is essentially a home. Our home in London, in Kensington, was the same, and that's what it became, a home for artists. 24th of the 9th, 81. Jam at the Vic, because we were jamming at the Vic, the young Vic. We took our stuff into the public square and we hired the young Vic, didn't we? I can't actually read the names on here. Looks like Barbara J.
So you've got Barbara J, and you've got Cliff Richard, you've got
Oh, have we?
Rick Parfitt.
Oh,
Jack
Rick.
Parnell.
Jack. Drums.
That was the occasion of the 10th anniversary. Of
Yeah.
Nelson's group.
Oh, right.
And what you're holding is a jam jar, which in those days was full of jam. And Ron Ellison acted as
Auctioneer. Oh, yeah.
And that was and sold jars of jam with Jam at the Vic on them.
Jam at the Vic. One of the things that I like to talk about is godly mischiefy. Rob Gillian talks a bit about it. And godly mischiefy, we're doing godly mischiefy. Because God is the most subversive person. He's subverting, converting, subverting, realigning, reshaping, reorganizing, directing, producing, picking up the bits of discarded, throwaway, and making, remaking, making new. He is the visionary, the great artist. He is the jam maker and the jam. Jam at the Vic, 1981. We're 10 years old. What does a 10-year-old know? They know something.
The 10-year-old has energy.
Energy. Tell me about it. I see it in my grandson in Montreal, Canada. Montreal, Luca. Grandpa, I'm the champion. I'm the champion. I play him at board games and he wins every time. He is the champion. When you're 10, you climb up. I used to swing in the branches of trees when I was 10 and frighten my father. I did very naughty, quote unquote, dangerous stuff.
And how old are you now, Nigel?
When I was 6, I was clever as clever. I hope I stay 6 forever and ever. When I was 1, I'd just begun. I'm Winnie the Pooh up in the trees looking for honey, getting stung by bees. I did get stung, but I didn't like it, no. Ouch! What do we do with the ouch of life? What do we do with the yuck of life? Well, we give it to God and He heals it and He makes it work and we learn lessons. We learn lessons on the journey of healing, being healed. Blood on the wall, yes. Togetherness, yes. Human beings, not human doings, yes. All those things. So much to learn.
At 18 years of age or so, I thought I knew it all. My hair was long, my jeans were tight. I loved a knife or bottle fight, provided mates stood left and right and those we thought were small. Me mates and me, we'd never been, so off to church we file. We walked inside about 3 abreast, straight down the middle aisle. Some of us were smoking fags and others sucking sherbets. We sat in what they called a pew, then looked around to see just who would come inside. Here, let me tell you, they looked a load of herberts. The row behind was full of dames. You should have seen their looks. Then one old dear gave me a smile and offered me some books. We passed them round. Here, you should have seen the words all set out like poetry is. The words fair put us in a tiz, and Fred said through his lemon fizz, "These books are for the birds." Shh. With touch the place did buzz. Sam stood and shouted, "Do belt up, you make more noise than us." We looked around the building then. It really was revealing. Sam says, "Here, look, there ain't a carpet on the floor. They're so poor they can't afford a ceiling. Can't afford electric either, using candles everywhere. Coloured windows like my granny's at the bottom of her stair." "Shut your face," I said to Sammy. "I'm for listening." So is Ron. From the left, without a noise, came a line of little boys. Sam says in his loudest voice, "Cool, they've all got nighties on. Blokes as well, with cloaks and banners. Here, look at that one, must be queer." Then they dare condemn us rockers for the way we choose our gear. Round the church, we watched them marching like a circus out on hire. Sam says, "Here, where's the holy water, missus?" Because the handbag's caught on fire. Well, if looks could kill, we'd all have dropped. Well, they can't, I'm glad to say. So without a lot of bother, everything got underway.
And how does that poem end, Nigel?
The church is middle class.
Did that poem sort it? Did it make a difference?
To me, the poet, or the world? It made a huge difference, because when I did it at the World Congress on Evangelism in Berlin, the first one, with Billy Graham inviting and Haile Selassie sitting next to him in the front row, Emperor of Ethiopia, 6,000 delegates at the gathering. Half of them, when I got up to do that, got up and walked out. Billy, at the end of it, still there, on his feet, shouting, clapping. Drama in the sanctuary. Wow.
For a great man for catchphrases, which one would you choose to be remembered by?
I would like to be remembered that he loved me in a good way.